Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. He spent 10 years building paradise, a buzzing sanctuary of bees, blossoms, and life. But while he was away, the HOA's ruthless queen bulldozed it to dust. What she didn't know. She hadn't just destroyed a garden, she'd started a war, and Clay McMillan was ready to fight back. The thing about gardens is, they don't just grow, they become. You build them one broken fingernail at a time, one root at a time, and, in my case, over the course of 10 years, one stupid HOA warning letter at a time. My name is Clay McMillan. I'm 39, a landscape architect, and proud owner of a house on the outskirts of a lakeside community in Virginia. I bought the place precisely because it wasn't part of an HOA. The plot sat just outside the invisible yet very real iron curtain that was the Lakeside Unity Homeowners Association. I had my own land, my own rules, and a vision no pastel-loving committee could veto. My lot backs onto the tree line bordering their tightly manicured kingdom. Between us, a neatly pruned hedge, a stone path, and a charming wooden fence with a sign that read, "Private Property. No HOA jurisdiction," just to make it crystal clear. Over the last decade, I turned what was once an overgrown mess into a certified, state-registered pollinator sanctuary. We're talking federal bee grant, rain-fed irrigation, ornamental stone terraces, native flowering plants, and a hand-built koi pond. I planted trees you'd only find in botanical gardens, shaped earth like clay, and built a micro-ecosystem that, quite literally, buzzed with life. I knew from the beginning that it irritated Karen Delaney, Queen Bee of Lakeside Unity, president of the HOA, 57, always in beige slacks and a frown sharp enough to prune hedges. She had that permanent look on her face like she smelled sour milk, and unfortunately, the thing she smelled most often was my yard. We'd had minor skirmishes over the years, a few notes about aesthetic disruptions, some tense conversations at the property line, and once, memorably, a cease and desist letter regarding aggressive insect activity. That was about the Beehives. Registered, permitted, and fully legal, but Karen didn't care about legality, she cared about optics. To her, everything in Lakeside Unity needed to match. Lawns flat as carpets, trees no taller than their neighbors, mulch in exactly 2 approved shades. My yard was a personal offense to her color-coded ideology. She'd march her small dog up the HOA boundary like a military patrol, glance over the fence, and sneer at the wildflowers as if they were gang graffiti. But she couldn't touch me. Not legally. Not technically. My property wasn't on their map. It predated the HOA charter by about 75 years and was excluded from their jurisdiction. I had the deed, the survey, and a laminated letter from the county to prove it. Still, I had the feeling Karen thought if she stared hard enough, the lines might move. So when I got a 2-week contract to design a municipal pollinator garden in New Mexico, I almost didn't want to go. But it was good money, and besides, I'd left the yard in good hands. Or so I thought. My buddy Alex, a local horticulturist, agreed to swing by every couple of days and water the high-exposure sections. He knew the irrigation layout, the plant zones, even how to handle the bees if necessary. I trusted him completely. The first week went smoothly. I FaceTimed with Alex twice and everything looked in order. He even texted me a photo of a monarch butterfly on the milkweed. "Your babies are thriving," he said. That photo would later feel like a funeral portrait. On the 9th day, while I was knee-deep in cactus soil and trying to explain to a city planner why lava rock was not an acceptable substitute for mulch, my phone rang. It was Reed Ellison, my 70-year-old neighbor 3 houses down and unofficial lookout of the Eastern Ridge. I figured he was calling about raccoons in the trash again. "Clay." His voice cracked. "You need to come back. Now." I froze. "Reed, what's going on?" Karen, she brought in a landscaping crew, a tractor, dump trucks. They're tearing your yard apart." I couldn't speak. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. Reed filled the silence. "The big tree's gone, Clay. The pond, gone." I tried to stop them, but she told the guys it was all HOA territory now. Said they had a vote. She told me to get off official property. It's all being loaded into a flatbed. I booked the next flight. No hotel checkout. No wrap-up. I left my gear in the motel, shoved my laptop into my backpack, and left the cactus half buried. By the time I pulled into my driveway 36 hours later, it looked like someone had napalmed Eden. The red maple I planted from a sapling? A crater. The bee boxes. Obliterated. The koi pond, drained, cracked, left with a bent pipe sticking out like a bone. All the stone paths I'd spent years leveling by hand had been dug up and hauled off. In their place, churned earth, broken roots, and tire tracks. Everything smelled like diesel and rot, but the final insult was the sign. A shiny aluminum plaque staked right in the middle of the mud, read, "This zone standardized per Lakeside. Unity HOA Aesthetic Guidelines. Approved March 3rd. March 3rd. I checked the date on my watch. March 9th. I stood there in silence for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Reed came out of his house slowly, like he wasn't sure if I'd scream or collapse. Maybe both. I tried to stop them, he said softly. They said you didn't respond to compliance letters. I told them you weren't even in the HOA. Karen waved some map around and told the crew to take everything that didn't fit. Said it was time to bring the edge of the community in line. I didn't answer. I was already pulling out my phone. I didn't know it yet, but by the time I finished that call, to the police, to the Department of Environmental Quality, to the Virginia State Bee Registry, the first domino had already fallen. And Karen Delaney had no idea just how loud that crash would be. The police officer arrived just after noon, but I'd already been standing there for 2 hours, documenting everything. I moved slow, like someone walking through the aftermath of a fire, because, in a way, that's exactly what it was. My garden wasn't a space. It was a process, a living record of decisions, setbacks, and tiny victories. And now it was mulch-stained mud under a dozen tire tracks. When Officer Pearson stepped out of his cruiser, he looked around, let out a low whistle, and muttered, "Damn." He was a tall guy, early 40s, and not the type to get emotional, but even he raised an eyebrow when I showed him the before and after shots on my tablet. I had high-res progress photos, drone footage, water flow diagrams. I'm a landscape architect. I don't just plant things and hope. I document. I gave him a neat binder with a copy of my land deed, my federal grant documentation for the pollinator zone, registration with the state's Department of Environmental Quality, and the most recent survey outlining my property lines. Then I pointed to the metal plaque from Lakeside Unity, now tilting slightly in the churned-up soil. She had this installed while I was out of state, I said flatly. It wasn't there before. Everything here was removed or destroyed without permission. She doesn't own an inch of this land. Pearson squatted down next to the plaque, read it twice, and glanced toward the pristine row of HOA-approved homes in the distance, like they were a cult compound and he'd just stepped outside its reach. You say she. Who exactly is responsible for this? Karen Delaney, president of Lakeside Unity HOA. She directed the crew. I have multiple witnesses. That's when Reed walked over, followed by Lisa and Brent from the yellow house across the street. Lisa had her phone out, and without prompting, she started playing a video. Grainy but clear enough to see Karen, beige slacks and all, standing near the edge of my driveway with a clipboard, barking orders at a crew of landscapers in matching shirts. You could even hear her say it. Get rid of all of it. Trees, boulders, water features, everything goes. This entire space is being standardized under the new plan, and make sure that ridiculous bee box is gone. I don't want a single bug nest left behind. Pearson's eyes flicked to me. Yeah, bee box? State-registered apiary, I said. 2 hives. Destroyed. I didn't tell him about the queen bee I'd named after Karen last spring. I figured that part was poetic enough without documentation. Reed added his own verbal account. He had seen the truck with the trenching equipment, watched them rip out the irrigation system I'd spent 2 summers installing by hand. Brent chimed in, confirming he saw Karen hand a man in a neon vest a laminated printout, what she claimed was an HOA expansion map. None of them had ever heard of such a vote. Pearson took notes, asked follow-ups, and quietly took photos of the scene. He looked more serious with each passing minute. Do you know which company performed the work? Crew's long gone, Lisa said. But I got a photo of the side of their truck before they pulled out. She showed it to him. Greenrise Landscaping. Pearson jotted it down and looked at me. You said this was part of a pollinator protection program. Correct, state and federal. I have the documentation. Would you be willing to provide that to the Department of Environmental Quality? I already called them. He gave me a look of appreciation and added under his breath, You're not messing around. I wasn't. The moment I saw the crater where my koi pond used to be, something in me flipped. This wasn't just destruction, it was trespass, sabotage, and fraud. And it wasn't going to be solved with a stern letter or an awkward apology over HOA coffee cake. That afternoon, a representative from the state's Department of Environmental Quality called me back. Her name was Dr. Emily Whitman. She had a calm, clinical tone that reminded me of an ER doctor. I explained the situation. She asked for a timeline, GPS coordinates, photos, which I sent before she even finished speaking. We've had increasing issues with HOA overreach, she said, but this is unprecedented. Am I the first one with a federally protected bee garden to be bulldozed by a rogue HOA? First, I've heard of it, she said, but not for long. She informed me that the destruction of a registered pollinator habitat, particularly one involving funded hives, constituted a violation of both state conservation statutes and federal grant regulations. If the HOA directed it, they could be liable not just for property damage, but for environmental destruction. She requested to visit the property within the next 48 hours for formal documentation and to initiate an interagency complaint. Meanwhile, I tracked down Greenrise Landscaping, the company Karen had used. Their receptionist sounded nervous when I gave my name. Let me transfer you to our legal office. Legal office. Not manager, not billing. Straight to legal. A man named Greg Martin got on the line. Mr. McMillan, I assume this is about the recent site project, the one on Lakeside Road. Not on Lakeside Road, I corrected. Next to it. On private land. My land. There was a long pause. We were informed it was HOA common property. Did Karen Delaney provide documentation? Yes, she gave us a map. Do you still have it? Another pause. We may. We'll need to review internally. Hope you do it fast, because the Department of Environmental Quality will be knocking on your door soon. That seemed to land. Greg promised to follow up. I ended the call and sat down on what remained of my front steps. Bits of gravel and broken flagstone poked through the soles of my boots. I didn't care. Behind me, where 10 years of growth used to hum and bloom, was nothing but destruction. But in that silence, I could already hear something new growing, not from seeds, but from statements, affidavits, and laws, sharper than any shovel Karen had ever wielded. The roots of a different kind of response were already taking hold. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay on the living room floor with an old camping pad beneath me, the AC off, windows cracked open, and the humid Virginia air thick with the scent of overturned soil and pine sap. It used to smell like honeysuckle. Now it smelled like a construction site in mourning. By sunrise, I was up, booted, and sorting through my files. I printed every document I could find. Full-color property maps, HOA boundary overlays, county GIS data, all neatly tabbed and labeled. I brought them to the kitchen table, cleared away some cracked ceramic from a planter that had fallen during the chaos, and laid out what looked like a prosecution exhibit at trial, because that's exactly what it was becoming. At 10:15 sharp, I heard the sharp knock of confident knuckles on my door. I opened it to find her standing there, flanked by a smug sense of entitlement and the scent of cucumber lotion. Karen Delaney, wearing a beige linen blouse, oversized sunglasses, and that tight, practiced smile of someone who still believed she was absolutely in control. Behind her stood a man in a contractor vest and a clipboard, the site manager apparently. I recognized him from Lisa's video. His name tag read, Darren. "Good morning, Mr. McMillan," Karen said, as if this were a coffee drop-in and not the fallout from an act of botanical arson. "I trust you're aware of the changes we've made to your front yard." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, waiting to see what level of delusion she'd conjure today. Karen continued, oblivious. "As you know, Lakeside Unity HOA recently passed an emergency motion to expand our jurisdictional oversight to properties within visual alignment of the community frontage. Your landscape, unfortunately, created a discordant aesthetic experience for our residents. We had to act." My jaw tightened. "Your emergency motion has no legal weight on land not owned by your HOA. You can't vote your way into annexing private property." She waved her hand like I'd just brought up a minor technicality, not a constitutional reality. "Clay, please. This isn't about law. It's about harmony, order, unity. Look around you. We've brought your property into visual compliance with our community standards. The result is, well, frankly, a huge improvement." Darren, to his credit, was starting to look uncomfortable. You destroyed a state-certified ecological zone, I said, voice cold. You cut down protected trees, ripped out a government-funded irrigation system, and bulldozed federally registered beehives. That's not compliance. That's felony-level vandalism. Karen's smile cracked just a bit. There's no need to escalate. If you'd responded to our notices, none of this would have been necessary. I never received a notice, I said, because I'm not part of your HOA. You should have been, she snapped. Frankly, it's ridiculous that a property directly adjacent to our community has no standards. It affects home values. It offends the eye. We couldn't just sit back and allow the wildness to spread. I opened the door wider and held up a folder. This is a certified property survey. My parcel has been independently zoned since 1974. No HOA claim. No shared rights. You're on legally foreign ground. Karen narrowed her eyes. We were acting in good faith. No, I said. You were acting like a petty tyrant with a fake map and a god complex. Darren cleared his throat, looking like he wished he were anywhere else. Mrs. Delaney told us the work order had been reviewed by the board. I turned to him. Did you verify ownership of the property? Well, no. She said it was approved. She had a map. A map she fabricated, I said. You're lucky I'm not filing charges against your company. Yet. He stiffened. Karen spun toward him with that look. The don't you dare back down in front of the peasant look. But it was too late. Darren was already retreating. I'll need to refer this to our legal department, he muttered, and walked off down the path without another word. Karen lingered a moment longer, then exhaled in a huff. You're being very difficult, Clay. I'm being exactly difficult enough. She gave me one last glare and stalked away, heels sinking slightly into the churned-up dirt her crew had left behind. She reached the sidewalk, turned, and delivered a parting shot without looking back. Expect further communication from our legal team. I didn't answer. I just shut the door and picked up my phone. By noon, I was back on a Zoom call with Dr. Whitman from the Department of Environmental Quality. She informed me the agency had reviewed the footage, surveyed the pre-registered pollinator markers, and confirmed the destruction of federally acknowledged habitat. We will be submitting a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office this week, she said, and we strongly encourage you to prepare for civil action. If the HOA acted on falsified boundaries, their liability will be significant. That night, Reed brought over a USB drive. On it, full drone footage from 3 days earlier. His nephew had been testing out a new model and happened to capture the entire demolition from above, start to finish. You could see Karen in the center of it all, pointing, pacing, micromanaging. She told the guy with the chainsaw to take down anything with a bloom, Reed said. Said she was cleansing the palette, like she was in a damn art gallery. We both stood in my wrecked yard, looking out at what used to be a forest of buzzing color and layered texture. Now it was dirt, stumps, and debris. But I wasn't just mourning anymore. I was sharpening my shovel. And Karen Delaney had just given me all the tools I needed to dig. Dr. Whitman showed up 2 days later in a dusty state vehicle, clipboard in one hand, boots laced tight, like she was expecting to trek through a crime scene, which, in a way, she was. She stepped out, shook my hand firmly, and got right to business. I need access to all boundary points, before and after visuals, and any documents you've received from the HOA, she said, already scanning the remains of my garden with a forensic eye. I handed her everything, survey maps, printed photos, drone stills, even the laminated HOA plaque they'd left like a trophy. She studied it all silently, then muttered, "They really thought this would fly." "They thought they owned the sky," I said. We spent the next 2 hours walking the property, her measuring distances, photographing root damage, and marking where each section of the pollinator corridor had been. She paused longest at the crater where the koi pond had been. "There were native lilies here," she said flatly. "These were protected under state code." I nodded. They bulldozed it, said it looked swampy. Whitman pulled out a tablet and began entering notes into a state reporting system. The destruction of a certified pollinator habitat under state and federal registry qualifies as an environmental violation under Virginia Code Section 10.111197.1. That includes the eradication of registered apiaries, irrigation supported by conservation funding, and removal of native plant species on protected watch lists. We'll issue a formal damage estimate after review. Any idea how much that'll be? She looked at me. With everything I've seen, likely over $400,000. I exhaled, hard. That number was big, but it wasn't surprising. I'd built that garden over 10 years. Karen demolished it in one afternoon. That evening, I got a call from my lawyer, Mason Jarrett. He'd been reviewing the HOA's Articles of Incorporation, Karen's public statements, and the property records. "I've got good news and better news," he said. "Good news. They never filed any boundary expansion with the county. Better, that fake map she handed to the landscapers? You can see the watermark. She photoshopped the county seal. She forged the map? Badly. I've already forwarded it to the Commonwealth Attorney's office." The next day, things escalated. I received an envelope via certified mail from the Department of Environmental Quality. Inside, an official complaint filed with the Virginia Attorney General's office listing Karen Delaney and the Lakeside Unity HOA as parties responsible for the destruction of protected ecological habitat, falsification of jurisdictional boundaries, and unauthorized removal of regulated infrastructure. The document was dense, but the core accusation was clear: criminal environmental violation. Within hours, my phone blew up. Local media outlets had caught wind of the story. A journalist from the Richmond Sentinel left me a voicemail asking for comment on the HOA that declared war on bees. Apparently, the state's recent push to protect pollinator corridors had already put similar stories in the public eye. Now, this one, with a forged map, smashed hives, and a smug HOA president, was pure wildfire. By that evening, there were 3 camera crews parked outside Lakeside Unity. Karen's perfect little kingdom had become ground zero for a public scandal. I watched from my porch as she stood at her gate yelling at a cameraman, trying to shield her face with a landscaping brochure. Not a great look. Later, Mason called with another update. "Just got off the phone with the AG's office. They're preparing charges, likely multiple: forgery, unlawful destruction of protected habitat, and criminal trespass. Possibly more. Can they go after the HOA as well?" "Oh, they will," Mason said. "And Karen, she's looking at real time." The next morning, Karen tried one last desperate move. She filed an injunction against me, claiming that my wildlife operations had posed a threat to community health and safety, specifically citing aggressive bee activity. It was laughable and infuriating. At the emergency hearing, Mason and I showed up with a 30-page binder and a digital slideshow. Karen arrived with her manicured husband and a grim-looking paralegal who seemed like she wanted to disappear. When Karen stood up to make her argument, she talked about visual contamination, property value instability, and, most absurdly, biological terrorism by unsanctioned insects. I don't think the judge even blinked. He turned to Mason and said, "Is there any legal basis for this?" Mason responded, "Your Honor, the bees were funded by a state environmental grant and registered with the Department of Agriculture. This is not only a baseless claim, it's a deliberate attempt to distract from ongoing criminal proceedings against Ms. Delaney and her association." The judge dismissed the injunction on the spot. Karen's face twisted in disbelief, but this time there was no HOA to hide behind. Just her, alone, backed into a corner by facts. And facts, unlike lawns, don't bend under HOA pressure. The media pressure hit like a hurricane. What started as a quiet HOA squabble became front-page material. The Richmond Sentinel ran a Sunday spread titled "The Garden That Triggered a War," complete with before and after photos of my property and a side profile of Karen mid-scream, trying to block a news camera with her purse. It went viral within 24 hours. I didn't ask for attention. I'd have preferred to restore my lilacs in peace. But now this thing had grown roots far beyond my fence line. I spent the next few days balancing calls between reporters, environmental groups, and state agencies. Some wanted statements. Some offered support. One nonprofit sent me wildflower seed packets and a thank you note, calling me a steward of Virginia's green future. It felt surreal. I was just a guy who liked bees and symmetry. Then came the subpoenas. Mason called me early Wednesday, unusually cheerful. "Discovery just landed. You're gonna love this. Turns out the HOA board never authorized any of it. Karen forged the expansion vote. It's all fabricated." She just made it all up? She drafted fake minutes, submitted them to a private notary she's friends with, illegally, of course, and handed that to the landscaper along with her Photoshop map. It's a circus of fraud. She really thought that would work. She's been getting away with petty tyranny for so long, she probably forgot reality still applies. It wasn't just the vote. Karen had also falsified work orders, insurance paperwork, and even used HOA funds to pay the demolition team, nearly $20,000 spent under a made-up pretense. Mason was already preparing both criminal evidence and the civil suit for damages, but the big crack in her armor came from within. Reed knocked on my door that afternoon holding a flash drive and wearing an expression like he'd just found gold in his garage. "Dude, you need to hear this." Turns out his wife, Jen, quiet, mild Jen, had been on the HOA's internal email list for years, ever since they mistakenly added her to a board subcommittee. She never unsubscribed. The flash drive held dozens of emails from Karen to other HOA members dating back over a year. In one, she referred to my garden as an unsightly hodgepodge of botanical anarchy. In another, she wrote, "The bees are a liability. He'll regret ignoring our standards." But the worst one, the one that practically burned through the screen, was dated just 2 weeks before the demolition. It read, "He'll be in New Mexico. We'll take care of the problem before he's back. He doesn't belong here, and neither does that jungle." Premeditation, collusion, malice. Mason nearly fell out of his chair when I played it for him. This isn't just evidence. This is a nail in the coffin. That's intent. That's conspiracy. That's damn near open admission. He forwarded it directly to the Attorney General's office. By the end of the week, the state pressed formal criminal charges. 4 counts: destruction of protected habitat, criminal trespass, fraudulent documentation, and conspiracy to commit unlawful demolition. Each count carried potential prison time. And yet, Karen didn't flinch. Not in public anyway. She marched out to her porch every morning in her pastel robes, sipping from a world's best HOA president mug like the world wasn't falling apart. News crews still hovered nearby. She gave no comment, but she watched my property. I could feel her eyes like they were trying to will it all back into hedges and vinyl siding. But what Karen hadn't accounted for was the community she'd spent years terrorizing. First, it was Reed and Jen, then the Dodsons from across the street, then Lisa, the teenager with the phone. All of them came forward, offering statements, camera footage, screenshots of HOA messages, even recorded Zoom meetings where Karen had berated board members into silence. A slow, steady revolt was unfolding. People were done being afraid of her. They were done pretending the HOA existed for their benefit. Then came the HOA treasurer, a nervous man named Carl, who delivered the final blow. Carl walked into Mason's office with a manila folder and a trembling voice. "I didn't know what she was doing," he said. "I just signed what she told me to sign. But this is too far." Inside the folder, HOA bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals, payments to a contractor under false vendor names, and, most damningly, a canceled check with Karen's signature marked Property Improvement Fund, Urgent. The fund didn't exist. The paper trail was complete. Fraud, embezzlement, destruction, forgery, all wrapped in HOA letterhead and Karen's increasingly erratic signature. Mason looked at me and grinned. "We're not just going to beat her, Clay. We're going to bury her in paperwork." And for the first time since I'd stepped off that return flight, I finally felt it. Not anger, not grief, but momentum. This wasn't about one garden anymore. This was war. Karen was formally indicted the following Monday. Word spread fast. First the local news, then regional outlets, and by lunchtime it was plastered across national feeds. Virginia HOA president charged in garden destruction scandal. Her mugshot circulated within hours. She looked stunned, disheveled, like the HOA throne had been yanked out from under her mid-sentence. The charges were no joke. Criminal trespass, forgery, destruction of protected habitat, embezzlement, and conspiracy. 5 counts, all felonies. The state's Environmental Division added a civil suit, seeking over $400,000 in damages for ecological destruction. It was everything Mason had hoped for, but it wasn't just Karen under fire anymore. The HOA itself, Lakeside Unity, was being dismantled in real time. The treasurer, Carl, had turned over a second batch of documents showing that Karen used association funds to buy off contractors, throw private board retreats, and even reimburse herself for aesthetic stress relief, which turned out to be a spa. Weekend in Maryland. The phrase alone made Mason choke on his coffee. Meanwhile, I kept quiet, stayed focused. I wasn't interested in the fame or the spectacle. I just wanted the truth documented, thoroughly, legally, and permanently. The court date was set. Karen pleaded not guilty. Her attorney, some corporate type in an overpriced suit, tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, said the HOA had no intention to harm and that the environmental claims were exaggerated. He even implied I was negligent for letting pollinators roam uncontrolled. That defense didn't survive 20 minutes. The prosecution brought in Dr. Whitman. She calmly read through her findings, photos, and state permits. The jury watched drone footage of the property before and after. They saw the exact areas marked as ecological sanctuaries, the ones Karen's crew raised without a second thought. Then came the emails. Reed's flash drive was gold. When the jury heard Karen's line, "He'll be in New Mexico. We'll take care of the problem." 2 jurors actually looked physically sick. Karen sat still, no emotion, just that same smirk she always wore when she thought she was winning. But this wasn't a HOA boardroom. This was court, and her little empire was collapsing, plank by plank. Outside the courthouse, the press kept piling on. Environmental organizations were calling this case a landmark moment in private property rights. Several HOA reform advocates cited it as proof that unchecked associations could become dangerous. There was even talk of legislative changes. Meanwhile, I started hearing from people across the country, strangers, sharing stories of their gardens destroyed, their yards policed, their bees banned. Some of them thanked me. I didn't really know how to respond. I hadn't planned on becoming a symbol for anything. I just wanted to protect what I built. But maybe that's how it always starts. One person, one garden, one act of stubborn defiance. Karen's trial wasn't over yet, but the foundation had cracked, and everyone could see the rot inside. The jury didn't take long. After 4 days of testimony, 3 hours of deliberation, and one visibly exhausted judge, the verdict was read in a packed courtroom. Guilty on all 5 counts. Karen didn't flinch. No tears, no outrage. Just a quiet, rigid stillness, like she was waiting to wake up from a bad dream. But reality stood firm, and so did the sentence. 12 years in state prison. The courtroom murmured. Karen's husband lowered his head into his hands. Her attorney requested leniency. The judge denied it. Cited deliberate destruction of protected ecological assets, abuse of fiduciary authority, and repeated trespass with malicious intent. Karen was escorted out in cuffs, expression frozen somewhere between shock and confusion, like she couldn't understand how her version of the world had collapsed so violently. But the story didn't end there. The HOA itself was next. Reed and I filed a civil suit with Mason's help, joined by 4 other neighbors who'd been silently steamrolled by Karen over the years, fined for wind chimes, sued over mailbox colors, one even threatened for painting her back door turquoise. We compiled records, testimonies, video clips, and a financial audit of every shady transaction Karen had authorized. 3 weeks later, a judge ruled in our favor. Lakeside Unity HOA was to be dissolved. Its assets, nearly $200,000, were frozen. The HOA's office building, ironically called the Harmony Center, was seized and sold. That money didn't even scratch the full damage tally. The total came to nearly $1 million. $420,000 in ecological fines, $350,000 for structural restoration, $180,000 in legal fees, stress damages, and public defamation. Karen was personally liable for a massive portion. Her name would follow those debts for the rest of her life. I used part of the compensation to begin rebuilding, but not the same garden, something bigger. I hired 2 local environmental groups to help restore the native ecosystem. We rebuilt the pond using reclaimed stone. We replanted with pollinator species that hadn't been seen in this area in decades. I even opened a public section of the garden for school field trips and community tours. People came from all over, not just to see the flowers, but to learn about boundaries, about law, about fighting back. And I installed one last feature, a custom-forged iron sign near the front gate. It read, "This is where nature was destroyed, but not justice." It's been 6 months since the last piece of broken stone was replaced. I still wake up early before the sun climbs over the treetops and walk the new path that winds through my garden, not out of habit, not anymore, but because it reminds me that everything here has roots, even the things that were nearly destroyed, especially those. The bees came back first. I thought they wouldn't. After the hive was leveled, I assumed they'd vanish for good, but 2 weeks after I laid down the first flowering time, they returned, cautious at first, then in swarms, like they'd never left. A local apiarist helped me rebuild the hive, this time with a discreet solar-powered climate system. We called it Hive 2. The kids on school tours love it. Then came the butterflies. We planted milkweed, cone flowers, and wild bergamot. Within days, the first monarchs arrived, tracing lazy arcs across the air like they knew exactly what they were looking for. I built benches in shaded corners, added signs explaining native species, even a chalkboard for visitors to leave notes. Some messages are simple. Love the pond. Others less so. One read, "My HOA paved our wildflowers." This gives me hope. I keep that one laminated in the shed. As for the town, things changed too. Reed joined the county zoning committee. Jen started a local petition for HOA reform laws. 3 of the former Lakeside Unity board members apologized publicly. One of them cried on local TV, saying, "We let Karen scare us." We forgot the HOA was supposed to protect people, not control them. I didn't hold a grudge, but I also didn't forget. Karen is still serving her sentence. From what I hear, she's filed 2 appeals. Neither went anywhere. I didn't watch the news when they covered it. I didn't need to. The system worked this time. The land spoke louder than her voice ever could. I used the last of the settlement to fund something I never thought I'd do. A small outdoor education center. Just a modest space. A covered awning, a teaching garden, a few picnic tables made from reclaimed lumber. We call it the Wild Corner. Every Saturday, kids come with their parents, their teachers, sometimes with buckets of dirt and wild seeds from their own backyards. It's the best kind of revenge, regeneration. I don't talk about Karen anymore. I don't need to. The scars in the soil are healing. The roots are deeper now. And every time I kneel to press a new seed into the earth, I remember not what was lost, but what refused to stay gone. Nature remembers. So do I.